And then, let's talk about this really interesting story coming out of India. Today we saw hundreds of protesters taking to the streets of India after the lower house of parliament there started debate on and passed a controversial piece of legislation called the Citizenship Amendment Bill. And if passed by the upper house, the bill would grant citizenship to religious minorities who illegally immigrated to India from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. And in order to become a citizen, those people would have to live in India for 6 years and take a test to prove that they belong to one of 6 religions. And the religions that would be eligible for citizenship in India are Hindus, Christians, Buddhists, Sikhs, Jains, and Parsis. Notably not included on that list are Muslims, and this is a massive deal for 2 reasons. First of all, India is a secular country, and its constitution mandates that all religions be treated equally. Right, so now many have described this bill as the most significant move to change the secular nature of the country since it gained independence back in 1947. And secondly, the bill would also make it easier to jail and deport Muslim residents in India, including people whose families have lived there for generations but don't have proof of citizenship. And that means that millions of Muslims in India could be left stateless. Now, this bill was actually introduced back in 2016. It even passed the lower house earlier in 2019, but it was ultimately dropped by the upper chamber after massive protests against the bill. And so now again, with this bill being reintroduced, protesters have come out to oppose it. There have been reports of protests and marches in multiple cities all over India, and specifically in the state of Assam, where people strongly opposed the bill the first time it was proposed. This also because they were worried that it would encourage tens of thousands of people from neighboring Bangladesh to immigrate to their state and get citizenship. You have protesters reportedly blocking roads, burning tires, and painting walls with slogans against the bill. This also prompting shops, businesses, and schools to close. Also of note, it's not just protesters, people in the streets that oppose the bill. Opposition members of parliament and Muslims all over India are also against it. Opponents of the bill and many legal experts saying that it would violate India's secular constitution, with opposition parties arguing that the bill discriminates against Muslims, which make up nearly 15% of India's population. But the thing is here, many Muslims in India say that this is a very intentional plan on the part of Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu nationalist party, the BJP, to essentially make Muslims second-class citizens in India. Modi is a staunch Hindu nationalist, meaning that he believes India is and should be a Hindu nation. Ever since he and the BJP were re-elected earlier this year, he has significantly ramped up his efforts to advance his Hindu nationalist agenda. One of the biggest examples of this is the situation in Kashmir, which we've talked about on the show a number of times. Right back in August, Modi stripped Kashmir of statehood and autonomy, and that was a massive deal. This because it gave India's central government a ton of power over Kashmir, which had been one of the only Muslim-majority territories in India. And on top of that, Modi has sent tens of thousands of troops to the region, basically putting the territory on total lockdown. And that lockdown has largely remained in place since August, with things like widespread internet and phone restrictions remaining in place to clamp down on protests, and shops, businesses, and schools in Kashmir largely staying closed. But that's also not the only major Hindu nationalist policy that Modi has implemented recently. This summer, the government actually started a very similar program to the one proposed in the Citizenship Amendment Bill. That program taking place in the state of Assam, the same state that protested the original bill. And under that program, all 33 million residents of the state had to provide documents to the government that proved their ancestors were Indian citizens. And that resulted in nearly 2 million people, many of whom are Muslims and lifelong residents of India, being left off the state's citizenship rolls. And so as a result, critics say that the citizenship bill is just part of Modi's efforts to identify and deport or even intern Muslims who have lived in India for years or even generations, with critics and opposition leaders even trying to paint the bill as endangering democracy in India, with one member of parliament even saying, "We are heading toward totalitarianism, a fascist state. We are making India a theocratic country." Now, Modi and his party have defended the citizenship bill, arguing that they're just trying to protect persecuted religious minorities who migrate from predominantly Muslim countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan, arguing that Muslims are not persecuted in Pakistan, Bangladesh, or Afghanistan. And while critics have said that part is true, they also say that it ignores neighboring countries where Muslims are persecuted, with one constitutional expert saying, "If Indian government through this bill wants to give citizenship to persecuted minorities in the neighboring countries, how can it exclude the Rohingya of Myanmar, who are far more persecuted than any other group in the neighborhood?" But ultimately, that is where we are right now. As far as what happens next, the bill will now go to the upper chamber, kind of their equivalent of the Senate, and there right now, according to reports, Modi seems to have enough allies that most analysts and experts say that this citizenship bill will soon become law. And so with that said, that is where we end today. And of course, I pass the question off to you. Are you concerned? Yes or no? Why not? And while that's also a general question, if you have family there or you live around there, I of course would love to know your thoughts on this even more.